At midnight on June 6, 1944, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe had already begun. But the German commanders watching the French coast didn't know it. Above Normandy, hundreds of Allied aircraft were moving through darkness. Inside them were thousands of soldiers, preparing to jump into occupied France. Far out in the English Channel, an enormous fleet was heading toward the coastline, and on the other side of the water, more than 150,000 Allied troops were waiting for their turn. By the end of the day, they would be fighting on 5 beaches. Thousands would be killed or wounded, and Europe would never be the same again. This was D-Day, but the invasion almost didn't happen. The original invasion date was June 5th. Then the weather turned against them. The English Channel became rough, the skies filled with clouds, and the forecast looked terrible. Eisenhower's commanders knew that launching an invasion in those conditions could be disastrous. The operation was postponed for 24 hours, or go home. Then the meteorologists found a narrow break in the weather. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even particularly good, but it might be enough. Eisenhower had to make the decision: go or wait. Waiting meant the next suitable opportunity could be weeks away, and surprise was everything. So Eisenhower gave the order. The invasion was on. Just after midnight, the first American pathfinders jumped into Normandy. They weren't there to storm the beaches. Their job was to make the invasion possible. But almost immediately, things started going wrong. Aircraft were scattered by clouds, darkness, anti-aircraft fire, and navigation problems. But there was an unexpected advantage. The Germans couldn't figure out what was happening. Paratroopers were appearing everywhere. There was no neat line on a map. There was confusion. And confusion was exactly what the Allies needed. On the eastern side of the invasion area, British airborne troops were attacking critical bridges. One of their objectives was the bridge over the Caen Canal. If the Germans could use these routes to move reinforcements toward the beaches, the invasion could become much harder, so the bridges had to be captured. The British glider troops came in almost silently. Then the fighting began. While thousands of soldiers were still crossing the channel, small groups were already fighting behind German lines. The invasion had begun from both directions, from the sea and from the sky. Across Normandy, German units were receiving reports: paratroopers, explosions, sabotage, aircraft. But exactly what was happening remained unclear, and that uncertainty was partly intentional. The Allies had spent months creating an enormous deception campaign designed to convince German commanders that the main invasion would come somewhere else, especially around Pas-de-Calais. The Germans were expecting the invasion, they just weren't sure where it was. And even after Normandy was attacked, some German commanders continued to believe it might be a diversion. That hesitation would become incredibly important. The English Channel was filled with ships, landing craft, destroyers, troop transports, minesweepers, battleships, thousands of vessels carrying men, ammunition, vehicles, and equipment toward France. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels took part in the invasion. They had trained for months. They knew the beaches. They knew the objectives. They had been told what to expect, but no training exercise could prepare them for what was waiting beyond the horizon. The coastline was getting closer. Before the infantry landed, the coastline began to shake. Warships opened fire. Aircraft attacked German positions. Bombs fell across Normandy. The objective was simple: destroy the German defenses before the soldiers arrived. But bombardment wasn't magic. Many German positions survived, and on Omaha Beach, the defenders still had commanding positions overlooking the shoreline. Then the first ramps began to open. Omaha Beach. The name would become legendary. American soldiers from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions approached the beach. They expected resistance. They got something far worse. The German defenses were still functioning. Machine guns opened fire. Mortars began falling. There was almost nowhere to hide. Some soldiers landed far from their objectives. Some units became completely disorganized. carefully designed plan began to collapse. For a moment, the invasion was dangerously close to failure. But something happened that planners couldn't fully predict. Small groups of soldiers began moving forward. Officers were killed or wounded. Communications broke down. Units became mixed together, so ordinary soldiers began making decisions themselves. They found gaps. They climbed cliffs. They moved around defensive positions. They kept going. The plan was falling apart, but the invasion wasn't. And Omaha wasn't the only battlefield. Further west, American forces landed at Utah Beach. To the east were Gold, Juno, and Sword. British and Canadian troops were coming ashore. Different beaches, different commanders, different objectives, but one enormous operation. Across roughly 50 miles of Normandy coastline, Allied forces were trying to establish a foothold in Europe.
Across Normandy, Allied troops began pushing inland. Engineers cleared obstacles, tanks moved forward, infantry moved through villages and fields. But the Germans had failed to throw the invasion back into the sea, and that changed everything. The Allies had established a foothold. The beachhead was growing.
By the end of June 6th, nearly 160,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy, but the price was enormous. The Allies suffered more than 10,000 casualties on D-Day, including killed, wounded, and missing. Yet the invasion had succeeded, not perfectly, not cleanly, not according to every line drawn on a map, but it had succeeded. At midnight, Allied soldiers were falling from the sky. At dawn, thousands of men were approaching Normandy. By morning, they were fighting for their lives on the beaches. By afternoon, they were moving inland. And by sunset, the impossible had happened. The Allies were in France. D-Day didn't win World War II in 24 hours. It did something more important. It opened the door, and once that door was open, the Allies were coming through. June 6th, 1944, the 24 hours that changed the world.